Media is so important in our lives. Once you see through, you take the red pill, as in Matrix, and you see how they distort reality, how they are political players. They're not neutral mirrors. They take a frame. They distort things. You can't not see that.
That was the voice of Peter Jukes, award-winning investigative journalist. Peter Jukes is an award-winning investigative journalist, screenwriter, and co-founder of Byline Times and Byline Investigative. He live-tweeted the historic Leveson inquiry and won the Press Gazette's Best Reporter on Social Media award. His BBC drama Sea of Souls won a BAFTA Scotland award. Peter has led groundbreaking investigations from phone hacking and dark money to political influence operations, relentlessly exposing misdeeds and defending free speech. He is one of the UK's most fearless voices on media ethics and the fight to preserve democracy. Welcome to Insights from the Coalface, elevating leadership beyond the boardroom. I'm Sarah Cole, a former solicitor turned life coach and founder of Cole Forums, a peer support network for CEOs and general counsel. This podcast is your exclusive access to high-trust conversation designed to inspire and empower leaders like you to thrive not just professionally but personally. In each episode, we'll delve into the challenges and triumphs of leadership, offering actionable insights and strategies to help you navigate complexity, foster resilience, and achieve authentic growth. Let's get started, and together we'll take your leadership beyond the boardroom. Peter Jukes is an investigative journalist, author and playwright, best known for his work on the UK political scandals, media corruption and disinformation. He co-founded Byline Times and Byline TV, platforms focused on independent journalism and holding power to account. His work on the phone hacking scandal and media ethics makes him a significant voice in the discussions about press freedom, democracy and misinformation. Hi Peter, how are you doing?
I am fine, though the world is on fire, but I'm quite cool. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm glad the world's on fire because it gives us something more exciting to talk about. I just wish we weren't burning. Wales isn't burning, it's raining here.
We love Wales. I am a quarter Welsh, and my great collaborator, Carol Cadwallader, is completely Welsh. So the Welsh and Alistair Morgan, who I did this famous podcast, Murder of His Brother, Welsh keep us honest. They keep us sane.
Well, actually, I've heard you describe yourself, I think, as an Armenian Welsh Londoner.
That's who I am.
Explain.
So my mother was adopted by an English family out of the East End, and her father was an Armenian violinist, fiddler, and a mother a Welsh school teacher. So that's where that side comes from, though we never found their names. And then my mother tried to find out who their real names were, her biological parents, only to discover the records had been destroyed in the Blitz. And on the other side, I thought I had another Welsh grandmother, but actually she turns out to be Irish and an English grandfather. So, but put it all together, Sarah, I think that sort of mangy, sort of mongrel mix of mine is very London.
But it kind of, the Armenian background, I think I read that she was the daughter of a man fleeing the genocide.
Yeah.
So I wonder, because I was thinking, you are so passionate about freedom of the press and democracy and issues like that. Do you think that comes from a sort of nationalism or a feeling of identity around when it can go very wrong? Because obviously genocide is often, unfortunately, the outcome of areas where there aren't democracy and we haven't got freedom of speech and those important things.
Yeah, very astute question. I think it does have an effect. There is a whole theory of the epigenetics of trauma, that they do affect physically the children and grandchildren of people who've suffered disasters or genocide or had to flee, become refugees and asylum seekers. My grandfather, obviously, I knew from an early age. My mother wasn't told till she was 8 that she was who her real parents were. But there was always a sense of my mum. She looked very dark. I could get a picture of her, but she didn't. She definitely didn't look English. And I had blacker hair. And everybody used to say, "Where are you from?" Right? I said, "Well, I'm from London. I'm from Northwood." There's that element, and I used to get cool things like I won't repeat some of the epithets, but like Boy Jukes, or anyway, rude ones about Italians or people. And then my mother, having been adopted herself, had 5 kids, and then it's got sterilized to stop having any more, and then adopted my kid brother, who was black. So obviously, you forget the epigenetics. My life was surrounded by people who didn't quite fit into North London in the 60s and 70s. And my mum would always say, "Oh God, thank God Hitler didn't win. I wouldn't have survived." And she had a reason to say that. She could be construed as Jewish looking. There's quite the Armenians are Semitic, but also her grandfather's an amazing man, very liberal man. Not only adopted her, but looked after a Jewish refugee during the war, who was brought up with my mother. So she had this sense of the precariousness of life. And I think that is, without, as I said, any physical genetic component, I had that. And brother being called all these names. And I think I first noticed that, there's a wariness, there's trauma causes this hypervigilance. So I remember when Srebrenica fell, I don't know why I was following it. Even my wife at the time, very friendly with still, was on Newsnight, and I was following it more avidly than then. And when Srebrenica fell in July 1996, I still remember I cried because I just knew something awful was happening. So, yeah, it's a bit of a curse. I mean, it makes you aware of bullying, especially my kid brother, being picked on, called names, and my family is very diverse. I've got my sister-in-law's Kenyan, and it's kind of the world to me. I mean, that's what I love about London. It's diversity that we find. People go, Englishness, Englishness is dominant here. They have people on the tube from all these weird backgrounds from Poland to Eritrea. They all queue. They all say please and thank you. The culture of Englishness and Londonness is very, very strong, regardless of where people come from.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about you is I think I read that you said you went off the rails a bit when you're sort of 14, 15, and then you end up with a double first class honours in English from Cambridge. What happens? Like an epiphany?
Oh my God, you found out all my secrets. So I suppose one of my areas also of hyper alertness is that there was a very talented man left school when he was 14 and then rose up in the army to become a second lieutenant. My dad was bipolar and would regularly get bankrupted and lose the house. And so by the time I was 13, we were homeless technically. And my dad had 2 bankruptcies and we had no house to live in. Unfortunately, my mother, they separated my parents for that time, and my mother just retrained as a social worker. So we lived on a hospital house, grim council house, on a mental hospital, and that was a difficult time in my life, and I was a bit wild. I had girlfriends at 14 and smoking and drinking. And I do, and this is where journalism comes in. It's not a fake, it's a completely true story that Sir Harold Evans, the great editor of the Sunday Times before Murdoch took it over, he saved me because my mum, we had no money, but my mum, was brought up to read the Sunday Times. She used to tell me off, Peter, you can speak like that in the playground, but don't speak like that at home, which explains my accent, right? Because I was like this, right, mate? Well, I was in Aylesbury, mate, you can talk like that. I said, what are you talking about? She said, no, Peter, don't you talk in the playground like that, not at home. And this wild time when I was like 24th in the class, and it was grim, we had the Sunday Times. And one thing I'd still like doing, despite my drinking and smoking and wild behavior, was drawing. And I used to draw the pictures of the Sunday Times. And I still remember there's a guy with a moustache, and it was Gustave Flaubert. And there's this woman painting, an old woman painting, and I read a poem about her. And gradually I began to read the paper itself, the Sunday Times. And this is interesting, insight and culture, Jonathan Rayburn on cities. And we did move back to a nicer house near my school, which helped a lot, rather than 5 miles out in the mental hospital, as they used to call them. And my work took off, and and then by sort of 5 years later, I was on the front page of the Sunday Times in the review section because I'd won an award for this play. So there was a sense of this. I was getting quite moved. I met him. I got to know him before he died when I started to become a journalist 10 years ago. Harry Evans, a great supporter, lovely, amazing man. And he kind of reached out to that paper, to this teenage boy, and saved him.
Oh, more than saved him, gave a gift to us.
Well,
Because after theatre, and I read about that award. It was like a best director or something, wasn't it, when you were a student?
That's right, with the great actress Jo Scanlon.
Pretty impressive. And then you went to India, like you do.
Like one does. Yeah, I had a travel scholarship to go there. And
Nice.
you know everything about me, Sarah. I'm going to have to do.
And well, just so interesting. And you've got this huge worldview, and it kind of adds up when you're reading about all the different things you did, really very young.
Can I explain about India, though? So when I was 5, I think 5 or 6 maybe, we moved from Rayners Lane, the kind of really not okay, very boring suburb, to Northwood, slightly nicer suburb. And I went to this new school. I must have been, we didn't go on holiday abroad those days, probably Clacton, but I must have been very brown, because I remember a girl asking me, "Are you from India?" And I said, "Yes." "Are you a prince?" And I said, "Yes." "Do you ride an elephant?" I said, "Yeah, I do. I ride on elephants." And I felt so guilty about that. I thought I better go and live there.
So you sort of redeemed yourself through true experience.
Exactly.
But then you did, obviously, you were a very successful screenwriter. And this is the bit that really, I mean, look, it sort of adds up a bit more now because you were captured by more political topics, I guess, early on. But then you've also said that deploying narrative to make sort of tough stories more accessible is your skill, your sort of superpower. So I guess the sort of storytelling through Waking the Dead and what was the other one? In Deep, I think. The Chief. There were some really amazing screenwriting contributions. So to transition from that to what you are today, which I'm obviously really excited to dig into where you're at now. I mean, why? What happened that you thought? Because obviously you had a skill there and a real talent.
There's 2 strands to this. One is that I kind of fell into drama. I was very lucky in some ways that I went to Cambridge at a time where Footlights was Emma Thompson, Hugh Laurie, and Stephen Fry, right? And Stephen Fry was
Okay.
at my college. He was much older because he'd been in prison, but he says he's talked about it. But he liked my first play and told me to put it on. So, and then there were some great actors around in that first play were people like Tilda Swinton. First 2 plays, Joanne Scanlon, Simon Russell Beale, Simon Beale, I think he is now, whatever, Simon Russell Beale, Sir Simon Russell Beale. So theatre was the cool thing to do. And then I kind of, that's why I went into drama and TV. Always, I think, though I love theatre and I love the imaginative element of it, I was always striving to tell the stories of now. The one I won that award with, we mentioned, that made put me on the front page of the Sunday Times. I won. It was one of the plays we did was the story, a true story, verbatim story of an East End gangster, Arthur Harding, based on sort of verbatim history. So that was always there. And then when I did TV, I was always pushing. The first series I did, called The Chief, was all about police corruption. I was talking to proper police officers. This In Deep one, I went undercover with the police for 3 days. I did one called, wasn't very good, called Cool Red, but one of the great things was about the helicopter that flies out to accidents and emergencies. And I got to fly on that helicopter and go to all these accidents and stabbings and things like that. So, and then when I do things like, In Deep, there'd always be a true story, like grim, but internet pedophiles. Or when I did Waking the Dead, one of the big stories I did was about the Bosnian War and a photographer witnesses war crimes. So I think there is that strand of wanting to be a journalist, really, and tell those stories. But then the other thing, which is really important, because I was miserable at that time working for TV. Why? Because though it's fun to write, there's like 200 people between you and it getting on screen. 200 people that want to change everything, that paid more than you. And, you're very remote from the process. I remember going to see filming, and it's like it's great hanging out with the actors in the caravan. Filming is, you can't see anything. You'd have to wear earphones. You'd have to be looking at the directors. And it's like hours to shoot 1 minute. And it's very different from theatre, which I did love, fringe theatre and touring around. So you're very remote from the production, and you're very subject to the whims and tastes of changing commissioners. And I wrote this essay, which was the beginning of my story becoming a journalist, was after about 15 years of this, my career going up and down, and it got more and more centralized from the days of Dennis Potter, I'd really admired, shared an agent with, where one producer could produce everything. And there were 15 regional companies, ITV commission, centralized ITV commission. and one commissioner of everything on BBC, all the regions. And I read a speech of this Jane Tranter at the time, who I quite like as an individual. That'd be very clear, and she's done some great work on. She's one of the exec producers on Succession. She was head of drama, and she commissioned 70% of the drama in the country. And she gave this speech. They said, what we're here to do is to make the writer simpler, because audiences don't like complexity. And I was just reading at the time. I loved The Wire, Sopranos, Mad Men, because they're all really complicated, right? It's really, they're really not simplistic morally, or they go everywhere. I was reading this essay on Hamlet, written by Stephen Greenblatt, who said there was an original play called Hamlet, which is really, really simple. Like, his dad has killed his father, and his uncle has killed his dad and married his mother. He'll pretend to be mad, and when he's mad, he'll kill his uncle, which he does. And it's a really quite simple Hamlet, that play is called. Shakespeare took this simple story and made it very complicated. And I thought that's what David Chase did with Sopranos. That's what David Simon did with Baltimore in The Wire. And so I wrote this long essay, Why We Can't Do The Wire, and lots of facts behind it. And my amicably divorced ex-wife, Sian, who was then like head of BBC Global World News or something, said, you mustn't publish it because you'll never work again. And then she read it, and it was so factual, said, you must publish it. And I published it, and I never worked for BBC Drama again. But I shrugged off that desire to obey in advance to keep the commissioners happy. And it was a first sort of act of truth-telling in journalism, which really kind of liberated me. And then, when Murdoch, and it does relate, because when Murdoch came along, when the phone hacking came along, I saw what I said about the BBC. It's not a problem of the individuals, it's a problem of monopoly. That no matter how brilliant Jane Tranter is, she shouldn't be deciding 70% of the drama. It will lose diversity, it will lose edge, it will lose difference. And so when Murdoch came along, the way I looked at it, my first book about it, wasn't that he's a conservative, I don't like him, was, look, Murdoch is a monopolistic position already in newspapers, could be in TV. He has 40% of the circulation, 50% of the revenues. Your chances of working for Rupert Murdoch, which I had briefly in the multimedia division in the 90s, are very, very high. So you're never going to blow the whistle on what other people working for Murdoch do. And you get corruption. And I think when, I'd get these right-wingers, Guido calls, you complain about the monopoly of Murdoch. A monopoly doesn't have to be 100%, it could be over 25%. You never talk about the BBC, do you? You don't, do you, Jukes? So I go, here's the article I wrote about the BBC.
Yes, I refer you to.
Yes, exactly. So
no, it's brilliant to hear the background, because obviously we met when you were in the thick of the Murdoch scandal, and the Leveson report, I think, was just about to be kicked off, and you were speaking at an event on defamation for me. And I think we had Steve Coogan there, and potentially Max Mosley definitely spoke for me, and Ian Hislop, because they all had been impacted by the atrocities that were being undertaken at the time by the Murdoch dominated press. How did you decide to, obviously you have integrity, you've established that, and you've already sort of put your neck on the line and had it chopped off in terms of the drama side of things. But yeah, you were definitely going to hurt yourself potentially in terms of future work. So it was very brave, if I might say, to go out. And I remember you saying, well, I don't even know how I'm going to fund this if I sit there through this inquiry, etc. It was just very brave, I thought, at the time.
It wasn't that brave. Two things. It was a new area. I didn't know what I was doing. It's always very good to stumble into a minefield unaware. And yeah, one of the things that happened was that, I'd done this first book on Murdoch based on the phone hacking. I was just going to go to the court to update it. And what happened is, maybe because I'm a dramatist, I started when you only had 140 characters tweeting out the opening, which is the prosecutor's opening, which was full of all this spicy stuff like Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson having an affair and the charges and people pleading guilty. And my Twitter following just leapt up 15,000. And I thought, oh God, right, okay, sorry guys, I've got to go now. I'm, really short of money at this point. Journalism was good, but it wasn't playing well. And they said, we'll pay you to stay. Well, I said, okay, I put a crowdfunder up and 4,000 arrived that night. So, and then over the course of the trial and did a book, I probably, not a huge salary, but I probably, raised about £40,000, which would keep me going that year. That was good because I wasn't waiting for a commissioner to press a button or, it was coming straight into my bank account. But more importantly, it was having a direct audience. That's what I loved about theatre. You could see if they were bored, you could see if they were yawning, you could see if they were laughing, you could see if they were crying. You can't on TV. And you have a direct relationship with the people you're supposed to be supporting, entertaining and informing. So this, not only did this crowd fund me, they gave me stories, sources, they sort of proofread my book, they helped fact check me. And, when you've got the crowd on your side, that is a lovely, lovely feeling. Ever since then, there've been some tricky moments. They've crowdfunded Byline. I now run, as you know, Byline Times, but even me personally, when people made ridiculous defamatory attacks on me. And on one night, there's a completely spurious allegation from a right-wing organization connected to Tommy Robinson that I'd once had a child in it or something when I wasn't even there. Ridiculous allegation. But I crowdfunded, he got 54,000 in 2 days. And that felt like, oh my God, it was disturbing. I didn't know, to be accused of these things. And it's connected to Russia, actually. But anyway, it's about 4 years ago. But that feeling that people are on your side and, and you stick up for them, and the other factor was people tried to take me down, Guido Fawkes, various tabloid journalists. Suddenly, when I was, doing the trial, suddenly out of the blue, oh, who's this Peter Jukes? Blah, blah, he's got this wrong. There should be a full stop here or something. Who's this? And I ring up somebody. You see, yeah, he's a phone hacker too. Ah, right. So it's funny that so the trolls, they keep you honest in some ways and they attack you legally. I mean, endless trolling, but they're counterproductive because one thing that was encouraging me to keep on going, if you're going to attack me for it, well, I'm going to keep on going.
See your point, because the stubborn kicked in then. What about Byline Times? Yeah. So I've had the pleasure of seeing quite a few of the TV sort of podcasts that you do, and I've also read a number of your articles, and I think they're very edgy. They remind me of the stuff Alan Risbridge is doing at Prospect as well. It just feels apart from the rest of the press. Is that the intention, to really be a source of truth almost?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not one to, I criticize and we criticize, which is a rare thing to do, other media organizations. And I've spoken to Alan Rusbridge about this and they were shocked. Other media, I won't name names, and not just News of the World, when he started revealing phone hacking. There is an omerta, the classic mafia vow of silence in the industry. You don't, they say, oh, it's, people aren't interested in this. It's gossip, business gossip, but they are. And there is a cartel, small number of powerful, mainly right-wing papers. If you step out of line, you won't get a job. And that is something, which I've read about, in the first books about Murdoch. I find that unfortunate. Now, I've been banging on about this, along with Alan, who's done a Graham Cladd, his back at Prospect, from his Guardian days, for over a decade now. And I work a lot with Carol Cadwallader, the Observer journalist, great friend of mine. And first, she says now, when I first met her in 2017, what's that, 8 years ago, she thought, oh, he's that guy who's a bit mad about the press. He's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. Then we got on well. But now she goes, you were right. You were right. And my editor, Hardeep, who's, in her 30s, what's Peter on about? And she, 3 years ago, the key mission of Byline Times is we hold other media to account. Because it's what the papers don't say. That's our motto. I can't say, should say, and media is so important in our lives. Once you see through, you take the red pill, as in Matrix, and you see how they distort reality, how they are political players. They're not neutral mirrors. They take a frame. They distort things. You can't not see that. And the audience are bamboozled by them. They have a revolving door into government. Rupert Murdoch was called the 24th member of the cabinet. He always has to visit the prime minister through the back door. when the new prime minister is elected, they are sources of power themselves. So they need to be held to account, as Leveson made clear. Who watches the watchmen? They're not neutral. Why do they troll? Why have they invaded this person's privacy? Why is this person on the front page, not that person? Why have they kept quiet about that person? It's in this information age we live in, the distortion of information is one of the key. Why is disinformation, misinformation is a huge part of the economy and a huge part of political power. And it's now accelerated the point, obviously, from legacy media to social media. You see somebody like Elon Musk who takes over Twitter, turns it into X, it becomes a machine for propaganda. It's designed that way. The algorithms that pay the count. So powerful that he helps to win the election for Trump. And he doesn't go in the back door like Murdoch. He comes in the front door running Doge with his kid in the White House. I love it. His kid said, "You shouldn't be president. My dad should be president." That's how powerful media is now. Social media, it is like the Matrix. It's the water we swim in. It distorts our whole lives.
And I think that sort of unchecked power is obviously a concern for most people who are cognizant of it. But there aren't many vehicles to sort of safeguard that, are there? And, Byline's, by your own admission, it's a sort of crowdfunded, self-funded thing. But that's tricky as well, isn't it? Because, the masses are with you or they're not. And everyone's belts are tightened at the moment. Cost of living going up, blah, blah, blah. So, that's a concern, isn't it?
Well, it has been a surprise. So we started as a kind of crowdfunded model, a sort of freemium product. And our first cross-borders, paid just because they believed in it. We're now a commercial product. We're in all the shops. We sell about 40,000 copies a month, and we wash our face and we make a profit, small profit, and we tend to spend it on more journalism. So there is the commercial model there. I think there is an audience demand for people are waking up. We get people all the time on Blue Sky or X saying, "Oh, I gave this to my friend. They couldn't believe it." You know what I mean? And we advertise now on buses, used to be on cabs. And I do believe in that commercial model because it's a signal that people are willing to pay for something. It's very tricky. People don't like paying for journalism. They expect information to be free.
And then conversely, though, how do you ensure that it maintains its editorial independence if it's now commercial? Because obviously...
Very good point. Well, I think the old model, newspapers were always the playthings of rich men until about 1850, right? When the Times discovered it could fund itself by having adverts on the front page, which the Times used. And it didn't need a rich man to tell them didn't need a Paul Marshall telling them what to say. And that model worked till about 2000. And then the internet robbed the advertising away from publishing. So it's very tricky. But these organizations reach Mirror Group, Times, the other papers lose money, the Sun loses money, the Times makes money. Still people are willing to pay. And if you're reader orientated, if you're funders, so we've had investment, but not very much. Our revenue comes from our readers. So the control of it, really, we've actually sold quite a lot. I don't know how 100, but we've got readers now becoming shareholders. We did a share issue for readers. And as long, that's how you keep your independence. If you're away from the big money, because we run very agile, light organization, we don't pay ourselves at the top very much, and we make sure most of the money goes to journalists. You can use the readers as your independence. Now, people sometimes say, "You didn't cover this issue. I would have stopped subscribing." But enough new people, subscribe that there's a mass there you can rely on for independence. I think, yeah. I mean, the alternative is two routes, and this is it's public information, so I'm not giving anything away. But anyway, there's one route, which is grant funding, like Open Democracy, or they go to big organizations, to charities and foundations for their money. Problem is, 2 years later, Trump changes the law. I know people have completely lost their funding because Trump's saying anything in the information space no longer gets charitable status. And James Harding, who's taking over the Observer, has said this on the record, so I'm not. Somebody asked him, he's got 25 million or something, or 20 million to run the observer for a couple of years, but it's got big overheads, and how long will that last? And somebody asked him in a public meeting with the new staff, what do you do when you run out of money? And he said, there's money behind money. What that means is, please, James, come back to us, contradict me if you want. I think this question has been put to you. That you're going to look for another rich man, inevitably, not always, but generally a rich man to fund it. And therefore, I'm not saying James Hardy himself would constrain himself, but rich people tend to have interests. They tend to have friends. There's things they won't want you to cover. And even if they don't say it aloud, everybody, if they knew a magazine was like funded by, Exxon or something like that, are going to be a bit wary about covering an oil spill. So I think this is the problem of oligarchic capture of media, because there's not much money in it. Advertising's gone. And so Jeff Bezos can snap up something like the Washington Post and change its editorial for a fraction of what he owns in Amazon. Elon Musk, I did this calculation in my last piece for the current edition of Byline Times. In 2019, Elon Musk and Rupert Murdoch were both worth about 20 billion. And Elon Musk's reach was just surpassing Rupert Murdoch's. His reach just on X alone was about 250 million people. It is now, maybe there's only 200 then. You put all Murdoch's papers and TV stations together, his reach was about 150 million. Flash forward 6 years, and Elon Musk is worth 400 billion. That means he could buy Murdoch out, all those great dramas, Succession, you've seen, a media empire worth 20 billion. He could buy it out 20 times. So where we're having oligarchs that rich that make Rupert Murdoch like a piecemeal player, the first thing they want to do is buy media.
I think, just thinking from the perspective of my listeners, who are mainly CEOs, general counsels, C-suite executives, have you got any thoughts around, because obviously their businesses may well face public scrutiny, how do they uphold ethical standards in the way Byline does, or any other organization?
So we mustn't forget this, that I talk about the oligarchs. They tend to be offshore based, or, some in tech. They do not adhere to the moral standards that 99% of businesses do. We look at a lot of commercial organizations, and as you know, in the Whetstone you work in, the sense of probity, sense of diversity, inclusion, environmental responsibility, good human resources practices, ethical behavior. They all want to, and most businesses do aspire to that. And I think most businesses have nothing to fear from ethical journalism. In fact, we're doing you a favor, because the guys who cheat, cut corners, treat their staff badly, don't pay their creditors, those guys are having a free ride. When you're behaving ethically, those guys are shortcutting and taking business away from you in an unethical way. And if we expose the bad guys, we help elevate good practice. And I think, we did a lot on the PPE scandal, these COVID contracts that went to buy personal protective equipment. A lot of them fast-tracked this VIP lane. A lot of them connected to Tory donors or lords and things like that, or associated with the Conservative Party. Genuine businessmen and women were shocked that they had that PPE and they could have delivered it at cost much more effectively than this crony cop, which a lot of it is, it's still paying for it to be stored or burned. And I see what's happened since with the inquiry and the work we did, and that was followed later up by people like The Guardian, looking at Baroness Simone and her contracts. That has set an ethical standard, which now, procurement, which makes it fairer for everybody. And the bad guys, or these practices, get criticized and exposed by the NAO and others. And this helps business because it makes it a fair and level playing field. When I said to you about monopoly, right that back to the beginning, I'm associated with the left, but when it comes to business, I'm a small business, but I'm 4 companies. I believe in the free market, or the fair market. Let's call it a fair market, where there isn't this capture by Elon Musk getting another Starlink contract because he knows somebody in government, where we all start off on the basis of our talents, the products and services we deliver. And those guys who we expose, they call all this fair practice, all the stuff which you do so well at the businesses you work with, woke capitalism, right? Because they want unwoke capitalism. They want monopoly. That isn't capitalism. That isn't free market capitalism. That's monopolistic capitalism. And we all suffer from that because capitalism, if it becomes monopoly, it becomes inefficient. People can price gouge. They get lazy. Corruption ensues. But a free and open market, fair, free and open markets, lead to, good competition, lower prices, higher standards.
And I think the other thing that sort of emanates from the work that you've done is how agile you've had to be in a sort of rapidly evolving landscape. And I think there are lessons there for leaders listening around agility, because obviously one thing we can all agree on is it's very fast paced at the moment, no matter what area you're in. Advent of AI, all this influence from social media. I wonder, how do you think you've cultivated that agility? Is it just, firefighting as it comes, or is there a bit more sort of strategy from your side?
So evolution is famously called a series of successful mistakes. That these things, like me turning up the phone hacking trial, it's mutation, and most mutations are bad, but there's some that's only adaptive, like whatever it is, being a bit taller or standing upright, and so obviously it's try and find out. It's a heuristic process. And it's only as we've gone on that we become more strategic. And I thank my business partner, Stephen Colgrave, for that. It's a big business background. I think strategy is really important. So at the first instance, it is always good to try. You know what I mean? We set up audio, we are on Substack, we do podcasts, we did a TV show for a while. And then if it's not working, back off. We do books as well. And try everything. My son teaches Tai Chi. He's a CTO as well, but as more than I do. But Tai Chi is where you always have the weight on the back foot. You're not falling forward into the motion. So you can put your foot out, and if you feel glass, retreat. And I think I'm learning to be better at that, is that you strategically put out there, but you're not reliant on it. You're not falling forward. I'm not saying, I would say there's a sense in the strategy of something like Tortoise to the Observer, that they've never made money. They've lost 20 million on Tortoise. So now they're going to the next one. So sort of, if you get bigger, then you kind of sunk cost fallacy, then it will hide the losses before. We always retranche and try to consider, and that's basically because if we're not making enough money, we don't pay ourselves. So we pay everybody else first, and then we have slightly bigger salaries then. But if it's a loss that month, we won't pay ourselves, which makes us very cognizant of what is working and not working. And then over time, it's 6 years now, we learn the core product is the physical paper, and refine that, get that better, then make all these peripheral things, whether it's a podcast or the website, converge around the central thing that makes you money. A lot of people didn't realize until we redesigned it that we actually had a paper. They thought we were a website. Labour Party conference, talking to John Ashworth. Oh, you have a paper, kid? Yes, we're a paper. That's what we are. So and I'm not good. I'm more the advanced intelligence guy. I'm out on Twitter. Oh, look at this. Let's do this. Let's hire this person. Let's commission this person to do this. Having strategic and sensible people making it work once I've sort of grabbed something. So Hardeep's a brilliant editor. She's very, very measured. She reads every word aloud. And you have that kind of consistent, you have the reconnaissance guy forward, but you have a rear echelon in military terms, which is constantly working out those supply chains, what you can deliver, thinking ahead in terms of what's the where are we going. And we've only just done that in the last 2 years ago, since we became a commercial success, went to the shops, realized, so 5 years time, 10 years time. So I know the people like this, listening to this will be sort of like baking cakes or grandmother eggs, because you do this all the time. I've just learned this because only really being a freelancer or working for as a freelancer for a big corporation, only in the last 5 years really organized.
But you're very good at collaboration, though, and that's something that sometimes leaders struggle with. You've got a very diverse team. For example, you've just outlined several people who are different strengths. And I think sometimes when you are doing something quite scrappy, like you are, then that makes you really very good at pulling the right people together. But I just wondered if it was a strategy of that or whether you just did it on instinct.
So yeah, it's very interesting. You do, and then you find out. I think the different strengths of the different teams seems very solid, very commercial. When we do, he knows exactly what it's doing, helps. But there's a diversity there, and this collaboration thing's very interesting. Yeah, we do work. I did a whole podcast with Carol Cadwallader through her organization. We let all our writers work for other people. Well, I mean, some of them not wouldn't work. There's elements of exclusivity. Our basic experience, if I could summarize my experience to you, Sarah, is that when we arrived 5-6 years ago, everybody tried to kill us at birth. A lot of people, even benign rival. Nobody likes a rival in this space. In media, there's a hazing routine. So there'll be a Guido Fawkes article, or Daily Express, or Sunday Telegraph, or even Private Eye will write us a negative article on us. It's almost like this is a ritual any media organization has to go through. You have to be. Maybe that's a natural place for the marketplace, isn't it? You don't want, who's this upstart? They know what they're doing. Oh, they've screwed that one line up or something. And then first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then you win, so we have respect now. It's what we do with that and legacy. So you touched on something about scrappiness. I've just been editing a whole load of other people's words to help Hardeep. I do the first big edit sometimes. And a lot of people move this form of journalism. My son's actually doing this as a coder, as fractional CTO, where you're kind of, and you basically, people are moving to Substacks, they are their individual voices, and they collaborate. It's almost like a federated universe. I still worry about this because why, like editing other people, while I like having a masthead, where there is something that's bigger than me, bigger than Stephen Hardeep, which itself becomes associated with truth or something, and you can have a succession, not like the TV series. Like in 10 years' time, I'll just be wheeled out. Well, I won't be wheeled, but I'll turn up at conferences and our festival we have every year, pass rounds of applause, and then go back to my dacha or something like that. There is no, I won't have a dacha, but the younger generation will take this on and create something for succeeding generations. The problem of the Owen Jones, I really respect Mehdi Hassan and Sataya and people starting up these slightly more one-man band things, is that what happens when they go? And we have this problem of political power in Russia. Putin never wants to leave. Trump, will he ever leave? How do you think ahead that far strategic that would create something which in 50 years' time, there's still a Byline Times and it still has this reputation? And I feel very proud if we could do that.
Well, I want to stick with that for a minute, if I might, because it's really interesting to me because it sounds like that pathway to building trust and credibility as a paper and a publication, that's something leaders can definitely learn from because that's what they do need to do within their own organizations as well. So how did you do that? I mean, how did you engage with audiences to build that really quite quickly, that trust?
I mean, there's two. There's the baptism of fire element. People do like a good scrap. And we've taken on, be trolled by those, especially over COVID, had a lot of COVID. One actually wrote for us. We challenged them. And so there is, and I'm sure this is tricky for business leaders, but you see some accounts can do it online and things like where they're quite funny and they're quite scrappy and they feel authentic and they, pardon my language, they won't put up with bullshit, right? So there is that. It's that edgy strategy. Obviously, corporate comms would say don't do that. But I think it's what something like The Observer or The Guardian, the Twitter had, some of these social accounts, they're very corporate, very cautious. Why? For legal risk and reputation. But they could be sometimes a bit scrappier. But then actually most of our time is being positively interactive. People tweet, I love this debate, or I gave my grandma a copy. We would thank them, we retweet it. I get somebody, I mean, hopefully they don't all come to me. But sometimes emails, like the subscription is not working, and there is a special house that deals with subscription. There's a source, and we have people dealing with it. I'll apply. I'm so sorry about that. Blah blah blah. Oh my god, Peter, that they feel we're approachable. We're really engaged. We will listen to them. Sometimes get ridiculous. I will get ridiculous. Oh, really? Russia's good, and sometimes I go, but I say, well, I don't think that's quite right. Putin is not really a communist.
So you're saying you're not in your ivory tower, basically. You're
No.
on the front lines, and you're
Yeah.
responding to even what some people might think is minutiae, but you're taking it all very seriously. And
Well, customer service, I'm sure if they're business to customer, consumer, that, one person has a problem with their subscription, it's reputation probably only worth £5 a month. But your way of dealing with them has a huge impact on on your reputation, the feeling, or even if they only they were really nice to me, or if they weren't really nice, they're really difficult to get hold of. That impacts. Also, there is a learning, I think. You can spend a fortune on market research. What's your brand like? But if you actually engage and listen to the audience, that might be cheaper than a focus group. And that they ultimately are the ones you're trying to serve. You've got to be careful not to waste time on, minor complaints. And it goes back to that crowdfunding thing and theatres, fringe theatre. If the audience are falling asleep in this show, maybe you ought to trim down the second half. You know what I mean?
no, there's definitely a lesson. And I think it's interesting to hear you talk about learning. I mean, continuous learning has to play a part. I mean, you were a speech writer for Gordon Brown. I'm sure you learned a lot about the sort of poacher turn gamekeeper perspective of having to be boots on the ground, trying to get a point across. What was he, Secretary of State at the time? I can't remember, sorry.
No, he was Chancellor. He was Chancellor.
Chancellor, right,
It
okay.
was very interesting to see that. I mean, I had several, and he wrote brief forward to my book on Daniel Morgan. I've haven't seen him for a couple of years, but in the late 90s, I helped write a speech on identity. And I said the learning of that, Gordon, it's very distracted, and all these people around him, including Ed Miliband going over the speech, basically looking, saying, I'm just to make sure there's no howlers there, a word which if you cut it would say something wrong. And I do think those sort of command and control systems around people like Gordon, we can end up shielding you and keeping you away from reality a little bit. You get a filtered reality. No, I'm not saying particularly Gordon Brown and Miliband, but I did see that construction around Gordon Brown's office, and I don't envy it. I'm glad that I'm generally not recognized on the street. I'm glad I answer these stupid emails. No, they're not stupid, but about some subscription problem. But sometimes because Hardeep has this phrase, which I think guides our principle to our readers. We're on the level. We're on the level, and we suffer, not exactly, we're not, don't suffer degrees of poverty or illness that a lot of this country faces, but we're not particularly remote from the street. We don't come from very posh backgrounds. All of us state school, I think, except Stephen, who burnt down his private school when he was 15 and left forever. He was a punk. So I hope that sense that we're not above it all. And if you're not above it all, you're not too far an apex predator up the food chain. If you're more like a sort of small mammal scurrying around, then when the big asteroid comes, which sort of kills all the Tyrannosaurus rexes and all the big apex predators, and your little furry mammal, you can come out and sort of do well.
Your books, particularly the story about Daniel Morgan and the Daniel Morgan murder being exposed, do you think that all plays into this perspective that you, I guess for want of a better phrase, you say what you're going to do and then you do it and then you stick to it. And there's some trust that builds from that. And I think we see that in companies all the time. If you stick to what you say you're going to do and then you do exactly what you've said you're going to do, there's trust builds from that.
Very good point. Yeah, I do think it's quite human interaction, isn't it? It's also risk taking. The risk is we're going to try to do this, right? Crowdfund this, the trial of Murdoch, and we did. Then the trial settled. So that's slightly risky thing to do. Nobody seemed to mind, and we delivered them. I think Yeah, it's like, you set out with the people are risk averse, obviously, because especially a bigger business, huge costs involved if you get it wrong. But if you do share with your readership or your audience or your buyers, your consumers, a vision where you want to get to, you will make mistakes on the way, and you'll have to readjust. And everybody gets that. But, the honest, they'll learn from that journey and you'll learn from that journey. I think, yeah. And I don't think it's, I don't want to make it sound like some great personal quality uh, I have. Um, I think, the organization has it because nobody in our organization is looking to pull a fast one to get to the levers of power and, become really famous or really rich. They kind of want to live a life where they're honest with themselves and honest with those people around them. And yeah, I think most of the British people are like that, and the Welsh and the Armenian and you know, the typical the Musk is like the apex predator of the dysfunctional side of power and money and idiocy, because he's a very smart man. He's been turned an idiot by his own echo chamber and the things he says. He has no idea about British politics and constantly opining on such stuff. You keep it real.
Yeah, 100%. And I think how digital is shaping public opinion, it's interesting as well for my listeners. How should they navigate those challenges? Because Elon Musk and the like are there, they're there to stay for now. So I can't see them falling off like Murdoch did in 14 days, like Ibrahim suggested, unfortunately. So what's the reality of that? How do they navigate that?
So there's a very human reality underlying this. I wrote about this in the recent edition. I've been online now, and I wrote about new technology, the New Statesman in the 90s. I got into gaming, and and then by 2004, I was on this blog, Daily Costs, where...
And you wrote that book as well, didn't you? About the killer robot.
Did I? Anyway, maybe not a book, but I mean, I read a lot of things about digital domain, and then I got involved in the Obama campaign, and that was very online, and my son went out to Pittsburgh. And what I saw in those early days, which kind of the geeky side of me, is the same trajectory now. Here's this great new sea of information. I hate you. Here's your address. You look fat. All this toxic element of human nature comes out, and Musk has just amplified that globally. There's 600 million people on this platform, which was great to share news, is now a toxic hellhole of right-wing bigotry and misogyny and racism. It's quite extraordinary. But every blog I ever worked on, there's a famous one, I wrote the story for the Prospect just before I did the one about BBC TV, flaming for Obama, and it was about the primary campaign. There's this site MyDD anyway, it all went horribly wrong. Everybody fell out. Everybody started doxing each other. You had fake sock puppets. You had all this stuff, and the only way I can see it, so is that we can't, put the genie back in the bottle. If it's not X, it'll be TikTok. It'll be Facebook. It'll be, now WhatsApp chats. We're living in these new digital cities where strangers who have masks and can pretend to be somebody else can get infuriated and all hell breaks loose. But this happened once before. So in the 19th century, the first book I ever did was about cities. In the 19th century, suddenly, thanks to industrialization, railroad, huge cities where all these people in the countryside, suddenly mainly rural society was urbanized. You had big cities before, like Rome, but they were not. The whole society was getting urbanized. Manchester, from 30,000 people to 1 million people in like 50 years. And what it was like Twitter is now, is a hellhole. Everybody's shouting at each other. There's pollution, there was crime, there's prostitution, there was sewage everywhere, traffic. It was just intolerable because strangers were living together in this new concoction and this new environment. Now, I live in central London. I'm looking now towards the Shard that way, looking towards the river. It's so peaceful. Ules, it's really clean air. It's very safe compared to how it was in the 70s, 80s. I remember it. It's a joy to live in central London, which you would not have said 30 years ago. And 100 years ago, I'm near the railway. It was soot, grime, crime. It would just be intolerable. We can do that with social media. And I think your listeners will have to understand that these dysfunctional models will need regulation. They got sewage installed and power, and they nationalized the railways. We'll find a way, because we're going to have to live together on social media. It's not going to go away.
And listen to you speak so eloquently about that. I wondered, what legacy do you hope to leave in journalism or storytelling? Or I'm not putting words in your mouth. What's the legacy Peter Jukes wants to leave?
So there was a time when I was a student at Cambridge. I'd love a book to be written about me, right? And then oddly enough, I was watching Love Actually, and Neil Pearson, who used to be quite a famous actor, who plays the TV producer in the new Bridget Jones. He played me on a radio play as Light Treats the Phone. I was like, well, this didn't change my life. And Neil Pearson, I used to really admire, played me. And I realized I don't really care about, of course I care about legacy, because, I want the world to be a better place, or not so bad place, slightly better, and stop it getting worse. I mean, I don't think you can, sometimes it's not about making the world a better place, it's to stop it getting worse. But it's very much about the moment, when I'm dead, or my kids won't be around. The kids will be around, but I won't be able to help them. The legacy is now, and it's tremendous privilege in those tiring, hopefully your podcast listeners can't see the bags under my eyes, to live in the maelstrom of this extraordinary historical moment of Trump and 80 years of post-war history. But it's very exciting. And if I was a novelist thinking about my legacy and my bound books, all the same color on a shelf, or somebody writing a book about my oeuvre and being read in universities, it's a bit boring, especially when you're dead. I think to live in the present, make a difference now.
Well, you say in Beyond Contempt that a free press isn't just a pillar of democracy, it's foundation. And I think if the work you're doing now is keeping it that way, then long may it go on. That's for my 2 penneth. There's one question I must ask you that I ask every guest before you leave us. And the question is, if you could create a leader's survival kit, what would you put in it?
A friend.
A trustworthy friend, perhaps.
No, so that's the cheap answer. A leader's survival kit would be a book, definitely a book. I'd probably put Madame Bovary in there, and French and English joint translation, so that you could learn French and read the world's greatest novel about illusion. Madame Bovary falls for all the romantic, religious illusions and then ends up tragically. Take Madame Bovary, learn French, and avoid her fate.
Now I have to go and get the book. Thank you, Peter Jukes. That was fascinating. Loved every minute. Thank you. That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.